Hello! Thanks for watching our tutorial on how to use the recall list in PracticeWeb. In this tutorial, you'll learn how to set up the recall list defaults and customize reminders, filter the recall list, send recall reminders by postcard, email, and text, track phone call reminders and set recall statuses, and schedule recall appointments from the recall list. Let's get started. To make sure that you're using the recall list effectively, it will help to set up your recall list defaults. To set up your recall list, go to the Setup menu and Appointments, and then click on Recall. Here on the Setup Recall screen, you can customize your recall reminder messages, reminder intervals, and reminder status options. The top portion of this window shows all of the recall messages, and the Remind column tells us when a particular reminder message will be used. So if we look at the column on the left, you can see that there are different reminders. You can have up to 3 on-demand reminders, and if you're using online appointment scheduling, you can have web scheduling reminders. If you're interested in online appointment scheduling, we do have a webinar dedicated to that service. For today's webinar, we're discussing the on-demand recalls. The second column tells you the mode of communication in which the message on the right will apply. You can have different messages for emails compared to postcards or even texts. We'll talk more about text reminders later in this video. The third column is the different variables that will automatically merge the patient's information into the message. So if you look at the message box, you can see that within my message, I have my variables in brackets. So to explain the variables, if I were to add name FL in the brackets to my reminder message, then the patient's first and last name would automatically merge into the reminder messages. If I only want the patient's first name, then I would make sure to use the name F in the brackets. To edit the recall reminder messages, just double left click on the message box. So we can change this message in any way that we want for our practice, as long as the bracket information matches the available variables that you see on the left. So with proper editing, this information will automatically merge into the message. So based on this example, we're going to go ahead and add our brackets with the name F. And so now, when we print out this recall message or send this email, it'll automatically populate that patient's first name for us. So based on what you see in this example, your message would read, "Hi Sarah, you're due for your recall." For postcards or emails, you can also include your practice information in the message, so that way you can instruct your patient in the message to call your office to schedule or confirm. Family lists will provide a list of first names and recall dates for all family members when the group family options is selected in the recall list default view. Now I'm going to take you to the bottom of the window. Here, you're able to set the recall list defaults. On the left side, you can see the status options that will be attached to your patient recalls when you send them certain types of reminders. The status for mailed recalls will be applied when the recall postcard is printed. The status for emailed recall is applied when a recall is emailed through the recall list. And the status for text recall is applied when the recall reminders are sent via text. The status for emailed and text will be applied when a recall reminder is emailed and texted using online scheduling. These status options can be customized. I'm going to go ahead and close this window. If you'd like to customize those options, you can go to Setup, Definitions, and you'll see Recall Unscheduled Status. You can either double left click to edit any existing status options, or you can click Add at the bottom to add in your own. So we're going to go back to our recall setup now. You can also enter the number of postcards you want printed per sheet and select whether or not to show the practice return address once printed. The next box will allow you to select the recall types you want to show in the recall list and send recall reminders to. To select multiple recall options, you can just click and drag or use the Control key. Typically, you're just going to contact prophy and perio patients, but you can customize recall types and choose to show those as well. Over to the right, you have the recall list default view filters. If you want to initially concentrate on recall appointments that are more recent, you can set the date range however far past due the patient's recall is, or how far into the future you want to notify your patients about their upcoming recall. Based on the example you see here, when I pull up my recall list, it'll include all of my patients that are up to 6 months past due and allow me to contact patients that will be due within the next 30 days. If I want to see all of my past due recalls, I can leave this box blank. Or if I want to ignore past due recalls and concentrate on future recalls, I can leave the day's future blank. In just a moment, I'll show you in the recall list how you can override this date range, depending on the patients you're trying to reactivate. If you have a check mark in this box when you generate your recall list, all families will be grouped together for more efficient communication with the patients. The option to exclude the patient from the list if recall is scheduled is checked by default. This prevents confusion to patients because your staff will not call them and ask them to schedule if their appointment is already on your calendar. If your team is diligent on scheduling recalls or proactively scheduling other treatment, you can also exclude patients from the list if they have any other future appointments scheduled. Below the default view settings, you can set the reminder intervals to also show patients in the list if a certain number of days have passed since their last reminder. Each patient will first show up on the list when their recall due date falls within your date range you've set here. Once a reminder is sent, they'll not appear in the list again until they are due for another reminder. The initial reminder value will be the number of days from the first reminder until the second reminder is triggered. For example, if I put a 12 in this field, my patient will not show up on my list again until 12 days after the initial reminder is sent. The second or more reminder is the number of days from the second reminder until the third and subsequent reminders. So if you put 30 in this field, if you send your patient a second reminder, it'll be 30 days until you see them on your list again and can send them a third reminder. The maximum number of reminders is the number of reminders that will be sent before the patient is removed from your list. For example, putting the number 6 in this field will include patients in the list until a 6th reminder is sent. If you do not want to set a maximum number of reminders, then just leave this box blank. On the far right, you can adjust the postcard position and how it prints on your postcard paper. The paper or postcard sheets you can use can be from any office supply, or if you specifically want dental-themed postcards, you can contact suppliers like Medical Arts Press. Since every printer is different, you may need to align your postcard templates, so the number you enter in this field represents inches. If you needed, you can adjust it to make sure that your postcard messages are properly aligned when printing. You can also set contact preference here. When a patient completes your registration form, if they prefer email as their preferred recall method, make sure you assign that in the family module. If you have the bullet in this option, when you generate your recall list, you'll see the patient's email address as the preferred contact method. Once you have customized your recall settings, Make sure you click OK to save your changes. To access the recall list, in the Appointment module, click on this little notepad in the upper left corner on the button that says Lists. This will bring up all of the different appointment list options. Now click on the top button that says Recall. The recall list will show any patient who is due for a recall appointment, but is not yet scheduled, if that's the setting that you chose in your recall setup window. At the top of the recall list, you can change the view criteria to expand or limit the results shown. After any changes that are made to any of these filter options, you'll need to click the refresh button to update the results. Changing anything from this window will not change your default settings. The from and to dates, by default, are based on the days past and days future values that were set up in the recall setup screen. These dates can be changed to view a list of patients that have recall due dates within any given date range. If the to date is left blank, it'll include patients that have never had a recall procedure or set complete. The Show Reminders option allows you to view only patients with a specific number of reminders. A good example of when this would be used is if you have sent 3 reminders by postcard, email, or text, and the patient hasn't responded. You can select 3 here, and the resulting list may be a list of people that you call personally. If you'd like to see patients with a certain recall type, you're able to select that recall type here in the Recall Type dropdown. You can also sort the list by due date, alphabetically. You can also choose patients by a specific provider. This is especially helpful if a hygienist wants to see a list of just his or her patients. If you're using your clinics option, you can also filter based on which clinics your patients are assigned to here. The Group Families option allows you to send just one reminder per family. The Show Conflicting Types option will only show patients whose recall type conflicts with the procedures on a scheduled recall appointment. If I check this box, the list is blank, so that means I don't have any conflicting types. But for example, if there were a prophy patient who has scheduled appointment with perio procedures, then they would show up in this list. The last filter option is to include reminded. This will show patients that have already received reminders and would otherwise be filtered out, according to the rules, from the setup recall. At the bottom of the recall window, there are several options that can be used to manage the recall list. You can preview the postcards for selected patients by clicking on Postcard Preview button. First, you'll want to highlight the patients you're going to send a postcard to. Now, click on Postcard Preview. If you're satisfied with how they look, you can print right from this window by clicking on the Print button. When that window closes, you're going to see a message asking if the postcard's printed correctly and if you'd like the status to be changed for all the patients selected. If the answer is no, then you have the ability to go back, make any corrections, and print again. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and click on Yes. You can see that the current status of the patients that were selected for postcards were automatically changed to mailed postcard. Now, if you realize the patients were accidentally marked as contacted, or if the reminders failed to send, you can use the Undo button located in the lower left. In this window, you'll confirm that you want to undo any recall statuses and communication logs that were created. So let's go ahead and click OK. And now you'll see that there's a message that's saying the comm log entries will be removed from these patients. So let's go ahead and click OK, and then click Done. Now you can see that the number of reminders field has changed. And you can always change the status back to none. If you have custom postcards that you just need to print labels for, You have the options of printing labels or sheets of labels. The Single Labels button will print a single address label for each patient that's selected. This is best used with an individual printer like Dymo or Epson. You can choose the default printer for single patient labels by going to the File menu, go to Printer, and then just make sure you choose the appropriate printer for the label type. If you prefer to print sheets of labels, you can use the Label Preview button to generate address labels for the selected patients. This option will print 30 standard labels per sheet. Like with single labels, when printed, this will also change the selected patient recall status to mailed postcard. Same as with postcards, when you choose to print the labels, you can see that the status has changed on my list. You also have the option to send recall reminders by email. If you have patients that have their preferred recall status as emailed in their family module, those patients will have their email address as the contact method in the recall list. Using the Control key, you'll highlight your patients and then click the Email button. You'll see a prompt asking if you would like to send an email to the selected patients. Go ahead and click Yes. Once the emails have been sent, the status will automatically change. If you really want to make sure that your patients are receiving your reminders, text message is your best option. 96% of patients respond to a text message within 3 minutes, and patients will respond to a text message 60 times faster than they will respond to an email. If you use PW Connect, your recall reminders can be set up on an automatic schedule. No more worrying about whether your staff remembered to send out these on-demand reminders on time or not. For example, you can have recall reminders go out to unscheduled patients 30 days before their recall is due, 15 days before their recall is due, and 15 days after. This schedule is customizable from the PW Connect app. In addition to the automated recall reminders, you can also send recall reminders on demand. This is really beneficial to your practice because it will allow you to effectively reach any patients that may have slipped through the cracks by not responding to the automated reminders. By using texting, you could potentially produce $180,000 annually in additional revenue. To give you a real example, if you send 1,000 text messages to unscheduled recall patients, and even 100 patients respond and schedule an appointment, if you multiply that by your typical production of a recall visit, and then multiply that by 12 months in a year, you can potentially earn this much in revenue, and these numbers are conservative. To send your text messages, when you click the text button, you can select the reactivation text template or marketing text template that you would like to use. You can also remove people from your text message by unchecking the box by their name in case you have duplicates. When you're ready, click Send. If the patients reply to your text message, then you'll see that at the top of your appointment module in the two-way text feature. And you can message them back with a time available to reschedule that recall appointment. You can also customize the recall text for both automated and on-demand recall reminders. If you open the PW Connect app, just click on the Text Templates tab. For the automated text, click the tab at the top for the message and use the drop-down to select the recall reminder. If you decide to change this message, just make sure you click the Update Template button. You can also create marketing campaigns for on-demand texts for recalls. Under the On-Demand Text tab, select Recall for the message type. Then, click Create New Template. These templates can be used on the Send Text button at the bottom of your recall list. We have a full tutorial on how to use your PW Connect in another webinar. If you would like to print the recall list and make phone calls to follow up, you can. Just click on the Print List button and it'll print a report that looks like this. The Run Report button is helpful if you need to create a report for doing a letter merge if you wanted to mail letters to your recall patients. Now that we know the different methods of being able to send recall reminders, let's talk about how to track them. Now we're going to discuss the main portion of the recall list. The center grid, this is where you can see not only the patients who are due for recalls, but you can also see all of their information. You can see the recall due date. If the recall due date is blank, that means this patient has yet to have a recall procedure marked as complete. Of course, you have the patient's name. You can also see the age of the patient and their recall type, whether it's prophy or perio, and you can change this based on your default settings or the results of the filter options you've selected at the top. Also displayed is the number of reminders sent to the patient since their last recall appointment was completed. You can also see the date that the last recall was sent. The contact column will show you the information associated with the patient's preferred recall method. So for example, if the patient's preferred recall method is set as email, the email address will show here. The status column will display the status of the patient's recall and is used to track recall communication attempts. You can also make any specific notes about those communication attempts. To add a note to this field, just double left click on that patient's line. Here, you can update or customize the recall interval. You can adjust the due date if necessary. You can change the status. You can also change the status by simply highlighting the patient, and then you can also use the control key to highlight multiple patients, and then select the status from the drop-down menu. But if you're already on this screen, you can change it here as well, making a note as you go. These statuses can be customized by going to the Setup menu, Definitions, then Recall Unscheduled Status. You can make notes or even disable the recall if the patient is inactive. One thing to note about this note section is that the note will be deleted once this recall appointment is scheduled and is reset when their recall is completed. If you need to go to the patient account or the family module to review information before contacting a patient, you can simply right-click and select See Family or See Account to be taken to that patient's family or account module. You can also do this by highlighting the patient and then either click on Go to Family or Go to Account buttons down at the bottom of your screen. The COM button is used to create a communication log for each selected patient. Please note that if you have multiple patients selected, the exact same communication log will be made for all patients. This is beneficial if you're making a note for a family recall. But if the patient is an individual account, then make sure that just only that one patient is selected. When you send an email or postcard, a communication log entry is automatically made. But if you want to make a general note or communication log, that's always an option. Now going back up to the top, you can see there is a Reminders tab. This is where you can see a list of patients who were recently contacted regarding their recall. You can change the view criteria by selecting the date range of when the reminder was most likely sent. After changing the date range, make sure you click Refresh so you can see your new results. The reminder list grid shows the patients who have been recently contacted and information about their recall. You can see the date and time the reminder was sent, the name of the patient, the type of reminder, and whether it was sent by mail, email, text, or phone. Now that you know how to track your recall attempts, now let's discuss how to schedule a recall appointment when a patient responds to one of your reminders. You can schedule recall appointments directly from the list by using the Schedule buttons at the bottom of the recall window. Clicking on the Schedule Patient button will create an appointment for just the patient that's selected. When you click the Schedule Patient button, it'll put the patient's appointment on the pinboard, and then you can drag and drop the appointment to the requested appointment time. The Schedule Family button will create appointments for each of the related family members. If your office is signed up with online appointment scheduling, you can include a link in your recall text messages, and your patients can also schedule their appointments online. So if you wanted to, you can place the online scheduling link in the text template here, as we had previously discussed. So when your patient schedules that appointment, it'll automatically populate on your schedule in the appointment module. If a patient chooses to call your office in response to one of your reminders, you can select the patient's name from the Select Patient menu, and then click the Make Recall button at the top of the appointment module. If the patient doesn't have a future appointment already, PracticeWeb will automatically jump the calendar close to the patient's due date and put the appointment on the pinboard. Now you can use the list of available appointment times below to select the patient's preferred date and time, and you can just drag and drop the appointment. If the patient does have a future appointment for a non-recall procedure, when you click the Make a Recall button, you'll see the patient appointment screen. Based on the date of the future appointment, you can either attach the recall procedures to the existing appointment, if their insurance will allow it, or you can click the Schedule Recall button at the bottom of this screen to schedule a separate recall appointment. This completes our overview of how to manage recall reminders in PracticeWeb. If you have any questions about something that was not covered in this tutorial, please call support at 1-800-845-9379 option 2, or email us at support@practice-web.com.